Rod will be recording this session. We're going to give you, okay, there we go. Let me see here. So what so my name is Gretchen Sands Gamble, and I would like to start by introducing myself in my language. So as I'm doing this, let's see here. Muju, Gretchen Sands Gamble, Indishnikaz, Bukejunong Territory in Dunjaba, Jikendodum, Anishinaabe, Ndao. So I said, my name is Gretchen Sands Gamble. I'm from Bukejunong Territory, also known as Walpole Island First Nation. I'm Turtle Clan, and I'm an Anishinaabe woman. And you are here for the Orange Shirt Day honoring and remembering to make it, Orange Shirt Day workshop, learning more about the history of residential schools and honoring Orange Shirt Day with the spirit of honoring and remembering. So we took a little time to write some words on the whiteboard, and I have Pam with me today. She will be monitoring the chat, so if you have any questions or anything, you can put that into the chat and we'll be addressing them as we go along, okay? And I think that's it, so I guess we can just quickly get started. I would like to just start by making this kind of personal to me, because I am Anishinaabe. I am from a First Nation, Walpole Island First Nation. And I'd like to share this picture here because this is a picture of my gram. So this is my dad's mom, and she's still alive. She's still living today, and she is a residential school survivor. She's also from Walpole Island, and she went to the Shingwak Residential School up in Sault Ste. Marie. So when she was 4, she was taken to residential school. So even though I have the job with the school board, the Elementary Indigenous Education Special Projects teacher, this is really important to me, and I have a heart for it because it is personal for me. So saying that, I just want to go over some of the goals that we hope to meet today in this workshop. So developing teacher understanding. So we do recognize that a lot of teachers are at different areas in their journey on the understanding of Indigenous history here in the land that we now know as Canada. And we didn't learn it in school. So we're hoping to bring to you key facts about residential schools to help deepen your own understanding. We also are going to be providing resources for you to use in your classroom to teach about residential schools, and also we're hoping to develop intercultural understanding, empathy, and mutual respect. So taking it back to the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action, specifically called Action 63.3. So you're going to get some ideas of how to honor Orange Shirt Day with the spirit of honor and remembrance. And so these goals, we did a survey last year after Orange Shirt Day with all the teachers in our school board, and these were some of the things that were requested of us for this year. Okay, so we're going to start with some key facts. And so I'm going to quickly, oops, let me see here. I'm going to send it back to Pam, and we are going to look again at the whiteboard, okay? Because I think that we need to acknowledge that all of these wonderful things that we get from our families, the families of the Indigenous people here in what is now known as Canada had strong family structures and strong community structures, and love and safety and shared values and traditions and stories and encouragement and acceptance. These were all prevalent in the lives of the Indigenous people pre-contact, pre-colonization. And there was education happening here on the land. Children learn from their families, they learn from their aunties and their grandmas, and from people in the community. So the education system didn't look like it does today, but it was prevalent and it was strong. Okay, so we need to acknowledge that yes, these things were present in the lives of Indigenous people pre-colonization. Okay, so now back to the slideshow. Okay, screen. Okay, podcast. Okay, alrighty. So a little bit of history about residential schools. So in 1831, the first residential school opened in Canada, and it was called the Mohawk Institute, and it was in Brantford. And this is actually where my dad's dad, my grandpa Joseph, went to residential school. And you might sometimes hear it be referred to as the mush hole, and that was referring to the food that they had to eat there every single day. It was not a nice place. So residential schools were government sanctioned and church-run schools. Indigenous children as young as 4 were sent to residential school. The parents had no choice but to let the Indian agent take their children. If the parents resisted, they would be arrested by the RCMP and thrown into jail. The two primary objectives of the residential school system were to remove children and to isolate them from the influence of their homes, their families, their traditions and cultures, and to assimilate them into the culture of the colonizers. So to remove them and isolate them from all those things that we wrote down on the whiteboard at the starting. Okay, so these objectives of removing and isolating were based on the assumption that Indigenous cultures and spiritual beliefs were inferior. Okay, so we can't have a conversation about residential school without talking about Sir John A. McDonald. And so a lot of us, from our history that we learned in school, when we were in school, know John A. McDonald is the founding father of Canada, or the father of Confederation, but he was also very instrumental in the residential school system. Okay, so here's a quote by John A. McDonald, and he refers to the Indigenous people as savages, and he's stated that the children need to be taken away. And actually, in 1879, he sent Nicholas Davin to meet with the officials from the U.S. Department of Indian Affairs to see how they ran what they called industrial schools, or the boarding schools there. So Nicholas Davin submitted his findings in the Davin report, and it included a number of recommendations on how the Canadian government could emulate that of the system of the American government. So John A. McDonald said, we need to take the kids away from their homes, from their communities, and his words were so that they can acquire the habits and the modes of thought of white men. So obviously he was in firm belief that the beliefs and the cultures of the Indigenous people who were already here was inferior. So by the year 1880, 11 residential schools were operating in the Dominion of Canada. By 1896, 45 schools were operating, and by the turn of the 20th century, 73 schools were in operation. Okay. Before too long, the government began to hear many serious and legitimate complaints from parents and leaders from First Nations communities. The teachers were underqualified. There was a huge focus on religion, and there were very strong reports of physical and sexual abuse. These concerns, however, were of no legal consequence. Under the Indian Act, all Indigenous people, children and adults, were by legal definition wards of the government. So the school administrators were assigned guardianship of the children, which meant that they received full parental rights of the kids in the residential school. So unfortunately, many children would die in residential school before the government finally intervened in 1907 by sending Dr. Peter Bryce to assess the health situation at the schools. So Dr. Bryce's role in the government was the medical inspector for the Department of Indian Affairs. And so he went and visited, and when he made his official report, he did not even try to hide his horror of what he saw there. So there was a tuberculosis epidemic happening, and he called it a national crime in his report. And he said that it was the consequence of inadequate government funding, poorly constructed schools, sanitary and ventilation problems, inadequate diet, clothing, and medical care. He calculated that the mortality rates among school-age children as ranging from 35% to 60%. But however, Duncan Campbell Scott, who was the superintendent of Indian Affairs at the time, didn't like what he was hearing. He didn't like this report, so he terminated the position of medical inspector for Indian Affairs. So clearly the health and the lives of Indigenous school children was not going to be made a priority by the government. So children died in residential schools not only from tuberculosis, but also from influenza. Children were malnourished. They were the subjects in nutritional experiments. They were abused so badly that they often tried to run away. But in the winter, in inadequate clothing provided by the residential schools, they often froze to death. And children committed suicide while in residential school as well. The residential school system deprived Indigenous children of their traditions, of a safe and supportive home in their communities in which they were loved, cherished, and cared for. They did not learn their culture, and in fact heard from people in positions of authority that their culture, their families, their language, and their people were bad, evil, were dirty. Children were punished for speaking their language, and they were beaten, and there were reports of children getting pins stuck in their tongues as punishment for speaking the language. And these are children as young as 4 years old, taken from their loving families. I think that we can all understand how children being subjected to this horrible trauma for generations can produce people in communities who are disconnected from their language, their culture, their communities, their family, and identity. And this was still happening into the 1980s and the 1990s. So in the 1990s, escalating social problems in Indigenous communities, such as alcoholism, abuse, drug addiction, suicide, as well as conflict between Indigenous groups and the federal government in the mid-1990s, brought attention and focus to the destructive legacy of the residential school experience into the mainstream. Meanwhile, in 1996, the last residential school closes in Saskatchewan. So from 1831 to 1996, that was 165 years, and that was over 150,000 children who went through the residential school system. It is estimated that over 6,000 children died while in residential school, but there was not accurate data collected on this because there was a point when the government stopped keeping data of the number. Okay, so this brings us to the term intergenerational survivor. So that intergenerational survivor refers to any individual who has been affected by the intergenerational dysfunction created by the experience of attending residential school. So we have to remember that the family structure and the community structure was fractured for generations, and these fractures are not easy to fix. It also includes people who are living in communities that are still feeling the effects of the trauma inflicted upon generations of children who were separated from their families. For the past 500 years, Indigenous people have suffered historic trauma here in what is now known as Canada. And today, Indigenous people understand that many of our current social problems are deeply rooted in the trauma caused by the residential school experience. In the wake of class action lawsuits, the government felt the pressure to address the concerns of individuals and Indigenous leaders and representatives. After negotiations with key Indigenous groups, the Government of Canada implemented the Indian Residential School Settlement in 2007. The agreement provided for restitution and redress or monetary compensation through financial initiatives and programs. In addition, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was created. So when former students of residential schools decided to settle out of court with the federal government and the 4 national churches, the launch of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was part of the terms of the settlement. The former students wanted to ensure their stories were not lost by settling out of court. The Commission's mandate was to gather the written and oral history of residential schools and to work toward reconciliation between former students and the rest of Canada. And there can be no reconciliation without truth. And we have to remember, as educators, we are the people who bring the truth. So I think that it's really great that we have people here who are willing to put in the work to learn the truth, to be able to share that truth so that we can all work toward reconciliation. So that was just a very brief run through of the history and where we are currently with the residential school system. So we're just going to take a second here and see if there's anything that we can address with questions or anything. Oops.
Okay, so we have nobody's written a question in our comment area.
Okay.
But I was so intently listening, I could see why you wouldn't necessarily want to chat.
Okay.
Write something there. But if someone would take maybe a minute, just give people gather their thoughts. And if you'd like to put something in the chat box, if you're looking for that, you can just scroll down to the bottom of the screen. Kind of on my computer, like it disappears if I move the mouse a bit. So it will pop back up if you wiggle the mouse, and you can type something in the chat box, or you can unmute your microphone and or just let us know you'd like to say something, and we can unmute your microphone for you.
Okay. Just keep plugging along here. It's okay. And I know like this is new learning for so many people. And so a lot of the time in this kind of a situation, it's just trying to bring everything in, right?
We do have a question.
Oh, well, well, you're welcome. You know, this is, I feel like this is what I'm called to do right now. So yeah, it is difficult. And one thing I always say to teachers is we need to find comfort in the discomfort, because we know that to move students along, we need to challenge them. And this learning and this teaching might be challenging for some people, but we have to be uncomfortable. We have to know that we have to do it, because if we just keep doing everything the same and easy way we've always done, things aren't going to get better. So yeah, this is like, and it is difficult. You know, there were times when I was making the presentation where I had to like stop and take a walk or something, but I know that this is just something that I have to do. So yeah, so. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much for prompting that for Gretchen. And the other thing that someone's written here, are we going to get a copy of the slideshow? We're very much into sharing in our board, giving that information away and sharing it and to use it to help build your own understanding and learning. So we'll put that information here at the end, but we have a blog and we'll be putting things there. And this actual presentation is being recorded, so we'll be able to share that in the same kind of format. To go along with that. And we're going to have some content coming up next about what books to use. That's in our second section. We think about our purpose of our presentation today is to build our own knowledge, some things we might do with students, and then what, just share a little bit what schools have done to honor Orange Shirt Day. So that's coming. There you go. And we're going to keep track of all these questions, so if we can't answer them today, we'll be thinking about what's next in our learning.
Yep. Okay, so we're going to move on. So, so next, this brings us to Orange Shirt Day. And what is Orange Shirt Day? So Orange Shirt Day started a couple years ago. In this picture here, we see Phyllis Webstad, and she started telling her story. And her story was, she was a little girl and she was getting ready to leave for residential school. And so she went shopping with her grandma and she bought a nice, beautiful orange shirt, and she was all ready to go, and she got left there. And the first things that happened to her was her hair was cut very short and they took away her orange shirt. And she was so sad because she was so excited about wearing that orange shirt. And while she was there at residential school, she had the feeling that she didn't matter and her family didn't matter, and everybody was saying such horrible things about her people back home, and don't they know that she matters at home? So it's a really good story to share with students. And this is a book that I know here in the Lambton District School Board, last year I bought a copy for every school, and then this year there's a second copy coming, because that was one of the requests of teachers, if there could be a second copy, because sometimes it's hard to find the book when there's only one in the school. So that check your mail. It'll be coming in within the next couple days, I believe. So Orange Shirt Day is September 30th, and let's see, where are we? It should be held with the same honor and regard as Remembrance Day. It's a day that we are honoring the residential school survivors, and we are honoring and remembering the children who didn't make it home from residential school, or the residential school survivors who have since passed on. And so it should be a day that is serious. So if we're wearing orange shirts to show our support, it shouldn't be treated as like a school spirit day where we see who's wearing the most orange. It should be a day of honoring and remembering, just like Remembrance Day, really. So these are some books that that we like to use. I'm sorry, the books that we like to use in our classrooms. These are really great books that are created and written by Indigenous people. And I really like to say to teachers, really try to find resources that are written by Indigenous people or created by Indigenous people. Because if you think about it, up until recently, Indigenous people have not had control over what was taught about them in schools. We've not had that control, but now we're starting to see more books being used in classrooms that are written by Indigenous people, that are sharing Indigenous voices and moving those voices into the center, because those voices have been pushed to the side for so long. There have been questions about kindergarten. So when I taught kindergarten for a few years, and I read Shishietko, and I've read Stolen Words with the kids. Like, you need to know your students, and I really feel that Stolen Words is a good book for that age, or When We Were Alone. And I'm a strong believer that picture books are for any grade, so it's okay to take the picture books out. I'm Not a Number is a really good book for grade 7 and 8. Those are some really great books. Okay. So in our school board, last year we asked teachers to share what they did in their classrooms for Orange Shirt Day, and we asked the schools to share. And we use this hashtag, Orange Shirt Day LKDSB, because with the 4 First Nations that are connected to our school board, we like to be able to share with reps from the First Nations what we are doing in our school board. So I really like this example. I took it from Twitter last year because it was a conversation that didn't only happen on Orange Shirt Day. This shows that, so it says September 25th. So this conversation was going on for the week before Orange Shirt Day. And I think that we really need to acknowledge that a lot of learning needs to happen before the actual Orange Shirt Day. We need to make sure that our students and the staff understand why we are honoring that day. And I like this too because it shows that the kids had lots of questions. So these questions can lead to inquiry and to more rich learning that way. This was something else that somebody had emailed to me. So announcements in the morning had facts and stories about why we wear orange shirts. And I think this is a really great example of learning, because like this year, maybe the kids at that school will be the ones who will do the research into writing the announcements, and they could be announcements for the week before Orange Shirt Day. So it's not just on the day, but leading up to it, so that understanding and that learning is being built. Some of the teachers and some schools were able to have visitors come in, and I know that that's very difficult, and especially around this time, because community members are being asked to come in quite a bit. So these pictures here, this on the top left, that is the librarian from Pukajinong territory, Wapale Island First Nation, and she came in and spoke of her parents' experiences in residential school. And the top right is Mary, and she works in our school board, and she goes into classes and shares her family's experiences too. And that's me down at the bottom, and I went and visited, and I read the Orange Shirt Day book to kids, and I talked a little bit about our family's experience as well. And it is difficult, but there are lots of resources that you can use if you're not able to get a visitor to come into your classroom. I really liked this example because this was in the front foyer at a school. So when any family comes in, any family member from the school comes in, they see this bulletin board. And this really shares the fact that Indigenous education and Indigenous history has value in this school. And so families who are Indigenous and non-Indigenous would see this every day. And I think that's really important to share that message to all members of your school community. This was kind of like a culminating project. So there was a week of learning about Orange Shirt Day in residential schools, and this class painted these rocks and had a fact on the back of or on the bottom of the rocks. So they painted these rocks, put the facts on, and then they went out into their town and put them around town. So people in the community would see these rocks and be able to learn more about Orange Shirt Day. And the same thing with this here, lots of facts being posted to be shared with the school community, because it really is about building understanding and building that honor and the remembering as well. Okay, so even for the smaller kids, the younger kids, we can talk about how they would feel, right? Okay, so I again just want to stress, before you do a culminating art project or something with your school, please ensure that you are building the understanding. So here are some resources. So this is our Lambton Kent Elementary Program Department blog. I'm just going to click on this to show you. Here we go. So this shows, we have lots of blog posts on here. If you click on the Indigenous tab here at the top in the green, there's a blog post right there about Orange Shirt Day, and it has lots of resources on there. It has pictures of things that we've done in our school boards in the past years. If you are looking for more information, if you look here on the right, Treaty Recognition Week, residential schools, Orange Shirt Day, there's information on the land acknowledgement there. And I also have book reviews and things on there too. So, and I'll have that on the screen, the link or the website at the end too. This is a book that I recommend to everybody who I meet, 21 Things You May Not Know About the Indian Act. If I talk to you probably for more than 10 minutes, I've probably recommended this book to you. It's a really good book, talks about the history, talks about residential schools, the reserve system, the Indian Act. I believe that every Canadian needs to read this book. The Indigenous Peoples Atlas of Canada. This is a resource that is being sent out to all Lambton Kent elementary schools, probably as we speak. Hopefully it'll be there within the next couple days. Really great resource for teacher understanding, for your own understanding. If you want to feel comfortable teaching the history, you need to read about it and learn about it. And this is a really great resource, along with 21 Things You May Not Know About the Indian Act. This is a really good resource here, wherearethechildren.ca. The website is excellent. There's also an app. It has really good primary sources on there, videos. There's lots of residential school survivor stories on there, and lots of photos and maps and pictures of residential schools. So wherearethechildren.ca. And if you're looking for the app, it's Legacy of Hope, Where Are the Children? It's in the App Store. Okay, so I just want to say miigwech for joining. And I really appreciate everybody taking the time on this beautiful day to spend some time to learn about this. So if you want to use our hashtag, if you're in the LKDSB, that would be great to share what you are doing for Orange Shirt Day. There's my email address on there if you need to email me a question or a compliment, so you can send it there. My Twitter handle is there, and at the bottom is the Lambton Kent Elementary Program Department blog. And I forgot to show the resources on the TRC website. So if you just Google Truth and Reconciliation Commission, all of the reports, all the findings are on there, the 94 calls to action. And it's a really good primary source for social studies or for research or anything, because it tells the stories of the survivors as they told them for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Okay, so we can take this time now. We're going to leave the meeting open for a while. So if anybody has questions, or if anybody
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay, so we had a couple of people post some questions in the chat, so thank you very much for this. One asked about where do you find books to begin with. The website Good Minds is a good spot to start because it is a website that gathers information about books written by First Nation, Metis, Inuit individuals and shares them, and so we know that we're getting the voice from Indigenous people. Oh. Am I muted? No, I'm not muted anymore. Can you hear me now?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. And so another question came through about the beautiful, well, the images that you shared. I say beautiful as in they were thought-provoking and talked about inquiry. And so I think you did mention that they came from the resources of the Truth and Reconciliation.
And from the Where Are the Children.
And Where Are the Children. So great primary sources of information to go along with that. Some people asked about grade level of books, what's appropriate for the books. If you go into that LK blog, some of the students in our board and teachers in our board and community members have shared a picture book or a book idea and gave it a review and talked about the book, why they liked it. So little video clips, so that might give you a little insight into what matches your students. Again, what Gretchen said, like know your students so you'll know what they're capable of handling and understanding with that. So our blog is the source for lots of information, and this will be recorded, and maybe Rod can pipe in there and say how we can get that out to people.
Yeah, so the recording of this session, if you want to share it with folks, it is going to be on a YouTube channel devoted to professional development sessions that LKDSB is doing. And I'm assuming that a link to that or an embedded version of this be able to be added to the blog, along with hopefully a link to the presentation that people can review it.
Great, thank you. Gretchen's having a hard time hearing people, but I hear you and you hear me, so what's going on? But if anybody has questions, they can speak up or type them in, and we can keep answering them.
Maybe while we do that, Gretchen, if you want to turn sharing off and maybe turn your cameras on, we can sort of see you and wave at you, maybe for a personal close to this session.
So lots of positive comments, Gretchen. You always make us are very thought-provoking, so thank you for that.
Well, I appreciate that we're able to join us. I'm sorry I can't hear anybody.
Yeah,
Right now,
yeah.
so
She's blushing now. She's all happy. But I think also I'd like to commend Gretchen on being so vulnerable about this. This is a topic that's so near and dear to her heart, and she has great passion about it. So it's kind of emotional being part of it too.
Well, thank you, Pam. Thank you for joining me here. Yeah, just reach out and I appreciate it. Did something come up over here?
No, okay. All good. Rod's there.
Something happened with my connection.
What's the app? It is.
Or no?
Nope.
I got disconnected.
Okay. Do you want to come over here and plug into mine? Yeah. So the app we're looking at is Where Are the Children? Is that the app?
Yeah. My Wi-Fi. I'll come over there.
Okay, come on over with me. As I'm sitting here and reading. I could probably unplug this, right?
Okay.
Yeah, we can talk.
I got disconnected from mine, so I'm joining Pam over here. Okay, so one of the questions was, what was the writing prompt? And I believe, so like on the picture where there was a shirt that the student colored, it said something like, how would you feel if you were taken from your community, or if you were taken just because of how you were, right? And that was the question. And I've asked, when I've read Stolen Words or Shishiatko to my class of younger kids, I've asked, even just how did this book make you feel, or how do you think Shishiatko felt when this happened, right?
We are the children.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, Where Are the Children is the map. If you look up Legacy of Hope, Where Are the Children, you'll be able to find it. It's a really good app.
That's really good. I think you met your goal.
I could tell.